Well, hi and good morning.
Good morning.
As always, I am delighted to be here today. I wanted to introduce this sermon with an observation I had when I was rereading it in preparation for delivering it to you today. Reverend Rod Richards of the Unitarian Universalists of San Luis Obispo, California, first delivered it in May of 2021, and I read it at Buckman Bridge UU Church this past January. And in only a few months since then, the whole idea about who's telling a particular story, which is at the heart of this sermon, has been upended, with history itself being rewritten nationally to suit a particular agenda, and even more perniciously, being deliberately removed. In fact, a couple of months ago, I read another sermon at BBUUC by UU pastor Joshua Berg that quoted the words of Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, Langston Hughes, and Bell Hooks, and then pointed out, quote, "The thoughts, admonishments, and teachings of our most important American ancestors of freedom and the power of love will not be taught to American youth because it would hurt white people's feelings or make them look bad. That is unconscionable. And people ask me, what action can I take? There's one. Never stop lifting up their words." Unquote. So I'm looking at this sermon a little bit differently than when it was delivered in January, but I think it still has power and pertinence today. Reverend Richards begins it with a reading that was originally part of a TED Talk entitled "The Danger of a Single Story," presented by author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. He says, "If you create a single story, show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, that is what they become." It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. Power is the ability to not just tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. The American writer Alice Walker wrote this about her Southern relatives who had moved to the North. She introduced them to a book about the Southern life that they had left behind. She says, "They sat around reading the book themselves, listening to me read the book, and a kind of paradise was regained." And I believe that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Reverend Richards begins, "I love to read. I love it. I have loved it, it seems to me, from the moment I could do it. And even before, I would badger my older brother to read the comics in the newspaper to me on Sundays, and I would marvel at the fact that a story could be created from those yet-to-be intelligible marks on a page. I love to read. And more specifically, I love to read stories. Now, don't get me wrong, I also enjoy reading about theology and psychology and science and politics and family systems and congregational dynamics. But there is a point where if I have gone a long time reading only nonfiction, when I begin to hunger for a story. Really, it feels like hunger. And, indeed, I most enjoy reading about theology and psychology and science and politics and family systems and congregational dynamics when the writers use stories that illustrate their ideas. So, both nonfiction and fiction hold stories. It's just that the stories in nonfiction are true and the stories in fiction are non-true. Right? Right? Well, not so fast. First of all, we would have to agree on what true means before we ask that question. I remember being in a writers group, a literary group, way back when, and the piece that was up for discussion that particular evening was a short story I had written. And one of the first questions was, did this really happen? How much of this is true? And before I could answer, my friend sitting next to me, he was a writer with a newly published novel. He grabbed hold of my arm. No, actually, as I recall, he kind of threw his arm in front of me as if we were coming to an abrupt stop in an automobile, and he was my parent protecting me from going into the dashboard. And he said, "Don't answer that. It's completely irrelevant. The story is either true or not. It doesn't matter if it happened. It's either true or not. It doesn't matter if it happened." Stories, art, poetry, music, the free reign of creative imagination can provide truths in a unique, engaging way. Though the details of what happened in the piece may be made up, the underlying awareness may point to something irrefutably real. In that sense, fiction, understood as fiction, can be true. And nonfiction, yes, can be a lie, even when it apparently tells us what happened. Understanding these aspects of the stories we tell, the stories we live out, as well as the stories we live in, it's always been important, but it feels particularly relevant to this place and time. This place and time abuzz with accusations of fake news and conspiracy theories and alternative facts and revisionist history. This place and time when truth has become a matter of stubbornly arrogant determination rather than humble exploration. This place and time where fiction cannot even keep up with the fabrications that pass for reality, and nonfiction strains even the most fearless imaginations. And it is important for us, we, Unitarian Universalists, to be clear on this, because we are explicitly the people of many paths to truth, of direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and making space for the stories we all carry. It could be said that we have contributed unintentionally, but perhaps sometimes carelessly. It could be said that we have contributed to a post-truth world. But we're not actually telling people that the truth is whatever you decide to believe, are we? That any story, every story, is true? I just think about the stories I tell about myself in my life. It's good to know that I am not locked into a single story or a single interpretation of a story, that any single story can open up into a new perspective. But there is also a danger in believing every story I may create. For example, let's say, going back a few years, that I haven't finished my homework. Now, I can tell a story of a very irresponsible person with a questionable character who didn't finish his homework because, well, that's just what he would do. Or in this case, not do. Or I can tell a story about a person who chose not to finish his homework in this case because another worthy activity called out for his time. Or I can tell the story of a person who gave in to laziness, was irresponsible in not finishing his homework, but has learned from his mistake. Any of these stories bear some connection with what happened, though they are widely varied in perspective and interpretation and would carry markedly different ramifications in my own understanding of myself. But if I instead tell the story of a bad dog who ate my homework, the homework that I never finished, I have left the realm of many paths to truth or many interpretations of reality, and I have entered the realm of lying. The fiction that I have introduced is not acknowledged as fiction and is not meant to illustrate a deeper truth, but rather it is intended to cover up the clearly evident truth. Let me provide two much more serious examples. May 25, 2020, Minneapolis. On a Monday evening, short after 8 o'clock p.m., officers from the Minneapolis Police Department responded to the 3700 block of Chicago Avenue South on a report of a forgery in progress. Officers were advised that the suspect was sitting on top of a blue car and appeared to be under the influence. Two officers arrived and located the suspect, a male believed to be in his 40s, in his car. He was ordered to step from his car. After he got out, he physically resisted officers. Officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs and noted he appeared to be suffering medical distress. Officers called for an ambulance. He was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center by ambulance, where he died a short time later. That's a story about what happened the night George Floyd was murdered. That was the initial police report. Now, a police report would clearly be categorized as a non-fiction account. And yet, thanks to the video recorded by Darnella Fraser, we know that for what it left out as much as what it included, it wasn't a true account. The jury in the Derek Chauvin trial decided too, it was not a true account. You see, there are stories that that seek to move us closer to the truth, both fiction and nonfiction. And there are stories that are designed to obscure, to distract, or to redirect us from finding truth, both fiction and nonfiction, either by what they include or what they do not include, or both. Ex-Senator Rick Santorum, in a speech at the Young America Foundation Summit, said, quote, "If you think of other countries like Italy and Greece and China and Turkey and places like that, they've all sort of changed over time. I mean, they've been there for millennia in many cases, and their culture has sort of evolved over time, but not us. We came here and created a blank slate. We birthed a nation from nothing. I mean, there was nothing here. I mean, yes, we have Native Americans, but candidly, there isn't much Native American culture in American culture. It was born of the people who came here, pursuing religious liberty to practice their faith," unquote. That is a story about this country. He had a relatively short time to tell a story about this country, and this is the story he chose. Think about what is not there as well as what he said. A blank slate, he said. We birthed a nation from nothing. And no mention, that we built this nation on stolen land with stolen people, no mention of attempted genocide and slavery. And what I found myself wondering as I heard this replayed is, who is we? We came here and created a blank slate. We birthed a nation from nothing. And I mention this not to attack a particular individual, but to recognize this as precisely one of the stories into which I was born. Thank God these stories are being deconstructed, or have been. Thank God more and more stories are being heard. There is never only one story. Some stories are pointed toward discovering truth, and others are specifically meant to obscure truth. Storytelling is powerful. And power is not inherently good or bad, it's simply power. One of the reasons we talk about stories here and how our stories are created, and the almost limitless possibilities of reviewing, renewing, revising, and transforming our stories, it's precisely so we can be mindful about the process, our intentions, and our purpose. It is part of nurturing spiritual growth. It allows for many stories among individuals and within individuals, but it requires a rigorous honesty and a deep humility. Sometimes viewing my story from a different perspective allows me a new understanding of my own actions and the actions of others. And it unlocks reservoirs of compassion that I had not realized were even available from within me. And sometimes, I am weaving a story so as to justify something that I am unsure of, to blame others for something that is my responsibility, weaving a narrative not to journey toward what is true, but to hide from it. Storytelling is powerful, yes, which means it must be grounded in what is real, even the most far-flung fantasies, grounded in what is real and pointed toward what is true. And in telling stories, I must be humble enough to know that whatever story I am telling is but a story among stories. And we should remember that we are not only the creators of stories, but we are created by stories. We need to be fearless in investigating the story into which we were born. The Israeli writer Amos Oz writes, "A society in crisis teaches itself to congeal into one story only and sees reality through very narrow glasses. But there is never only one story." Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie warns of the danger of a single story and says that it is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. Sometimes stories are told in order to connect ourselves with each other, with others, and with other stories. Sometimes stories are told and repeated over and over in order to silence other stories. We are a community of stories. The free and responsible search for truth in meaning, affirmed in our principles, is about the stories we create and the responsibility we bear to ground our stories in what is real and to listen deeply to the stories of others. Our lives become stories, and stories shape our lives. We display our stories in the ways in which we respond to one another and to life itself. The sorrows that have broken our hearts, the injustices that arouse our righteous anger, the embarrassments we've survived, the mistakes we've made, the lessons we've learned, the communities we've helped to nourish in the vast interconnected network of our stories, these come out in our everyday actions. It's important to be aware of our stories as we strive to know ourselves better. It is important to listen to one another's stories as we strive to understand one another more deeply. It's important to realize that we are not simply creatures responding to the stimuli of the world. We are creators, artists, writers, writing a new page every day in the story of our lives. When we tell our stories from deep inside, and we listen with an open mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. If only that were set to music somehow. We're leading right into that. It's the hymn number 10008 in the Teal hymnal, but you don't need that. Here it is. Please rise in body or spirit when our heart is in a holy place.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place, then our heart is in a holy place, then our heart is